There it is. Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Norman City Council Finance Committee meeting Thursday, November 17th, 2022. We have 4 agenda items, the first of which is discussion regarding the FYE 2022 preliminary audit.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair. As you know, we turned over our financial statements to the auditors back in September. They have been doing their field work since then and are prepared with kind of the unbound budget, but unbound audit, but this will be kind of where we were as of June 30th. So I'll turn it over to Clint Mercer, our chief accountant, and representatives from Forvis. I almost said BKD.
Old habits, right?
Thank you, Anthony. I think you guys all got a copy in your packets. In the version that you have, we have not received our actuarial report for other post-employment benefits, so that's not up to date. Just wanted to highlight that in your packet, but other than that, I'll turn it over to Kirsten.
Okay, Kirsty Houston. I lead the audit team past 4 years, I think. So really nothing significantly different in here. No significant issues that we need to address. It'll be a clean, unmodified opinion. The only thing in here that's new per se is GASB 87 is a standard we had to adopt related to leases. So you now show lease assets and lease liabilities in your footnotes. So lease assets are on, I believe, page 45, and lease liabilities are on page 68. So a couple new disclosures. It's more of a transparency thing, and it just affects your balance sheet. The only thing with that we want to point out is that lease liabilities have to be included in total indebtedness for your debt covenants. So it is something we've had discussions with management about, just something we'd like you to be aware of, as we have had other clients that with the lease liabilities coming up and in the future, as more leases come in, could negatively affect debt covenants. And if you're not aware, if a debt covenant is broken, that impact can be pretty impactful. It could make your bonds, debts callable, so due on demand. So that's really the only thing I wanted to point out in here, and that just has to do with kind of the adoption of a new standard. Does anybody have any questions?
I have none.
As we move forward in the process, the actual final and bound audit document will be presented to council at the December, I believe, 13th meeting for your final consideration and hopefully adoption. There will also be to follow a single audit report where the auditors are doing a compliance audit of all of our grants, which in this case is kind of a big deal because of all the ARPA money. But just, again, we hope to maintain that unmodified opinion on all of those things.
Excellent.
And just to circle back to with Kirsty's comment on the debt covenants, we are getting pretty tight on our covenants for the water fund. So just FYI.
What does pretty tight mean? How do you quantify pretty tight?
Meaning tight.
Oh,
Investors in our outstanding utility revenue bonds have a contract, have a covenant that we will have sufficient revenues to repay the debt with at least 1.5 times coverage, 1.5 times more than we would need to repay their debt. And because, we've talked many times about the status of the water fund and the need for that water rate increase, but we're getting really tight on that. And just know that means that we are either going to have to drastically cut back on our capital schedule in the utilities area, or we really need that rate increase. And just know that there are some other ramifications that the auditors are pointing out of that.
let me make a note of that. Yes, ma'am.
I guess I just have a question related to us continually talking about the water fund and like when that's going to come potentially back up for consideration. Is there any timeline that you're hoping for? And I think that this specific conversation might, how do we message that to residents that like, that it creates this critical need in terms of like financial and fiduciary responsibility for our water fund?
Good question. December 20th, we have a study session. Ref Tillis is working on a cost of service, and this will all be brought up in a package, and we'll discuss what's in front of us. And we're looking, sometime in 2023 to go back for a vote or recommend one.
Okay, so far, the things that I've heard, this seems like the most stark reason and explanation on like where we stand with our water fund, not just like, oh, we want to do maintenance and we want to do whatever, but like we could be in jeopardy of our contracts, our covenants with our indebtedness. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember?
I just wanted a little more clarification. So we're supposed to have 1.5 times what we can pay back. And with that, is that like what are the penalties if you don't have that?
Oh, they're severe. I mean, if you break those covenants, understand that, what Clint said of the call feature that is embedded in those covenants means that, whereas we have the debt service schedule to be paid out over 10 or 15 years, if we defy those debt covenants, then the investors in those bonds can demand that we repay them today. And instead of having to come up with, $400,000 this year to repay this year's debt service, we have to come up with $8 million today to repay all of the outstanding indebtedness. It's severe. And understand that if we violate those covenants in the Norman Utilities Authority, the first word in Norman Utilities Authority is Norman. And the investors in Norman Utility Authority, Norman Municipal Authority, Norman Tax Increment Finance Authority, City of Norman, Norman Hospital Authority, all of those bondholders are going to start to raise questions about the overall health of the city because we're violating those covenants. It's severe.
Thank you for the clarity.
Can I just make one comment? You said 1.5, but I thought the 1.25 is actually on the paper, and we shoot for 1.5. But the 1.25 would actually be that number where we'd be in trouble, right?
Yeah, in actual violation.
Yes. Just for clarity.
How close are we right now? Like at what
I
number
think
are
we're
we?
1.4.
So we're under that 1.
We're under the 1.5 that's suggested, yeah.
Okay.
So that's what tight means.
That's what tight means. Now, and understand that, you can do other things. You can cut back and just say, we're not gonna fix any pipes this year. And that would reduce the expenditure side, which means the revenue side you're okay. But just that's severe. If you're just gonna say, we're not gonna fix any pipes this year, that's a bad thing.
I mean, that would have impact on some residents.
Yes.
Well, and all of the emergency fixes that we've had over the last several years, right? Where we're patching lines and, we've got breaks and different things. And not to mention that winter is coming and that typically is not a great time with freezing
And then we lose water, and we lose all that.
Yeah.
My favorite of those was going over the bridge on Robinson Street, going towards 36th Street. Everything was fine. I ate lunch, came back. The whole world is wet and muddy. There's traffic all over the place because the line blew right there. Big old, it was like a 36. And so it's amazing how fast, and there wasn't anything on the way out. I wasn't searching the dirt, but there wasn't anything on the way out. And so that's an important conversation for us when we do this December 20th deal, we've got to do it. It's not a thing. And I've been fielding some comments to people just as I'm talking to them. They're not happy about a water rate increase, but we're how far below more? What's
I don't know about the number off the top of my head.
We're the lowest.
We're the
We're
one
way
lowest.
lower.
Yeah, the next up was Ponca City, I believe,
Oh,
was in front of us,
okay.
but not by much.
And it's just a matter of selling that idea that we have to be able to do maintenance. We have to be able to do the emergencies. We have to get this fund where it doesn't scare us.
In January, it will be 8 years since the last water rate increase in Norman.
Really?
So
And
you won't find any, I would almost guarantee you won't find any other city in the whole state that has gone that long without raising a utility rate.
it would be something that I think is a conversation, and not necessarily for right now, but that we put on a regular 2-year basis to start on the next water rate thing. Yes, ma'am.
I just was curious, historically, why don't we vote on it every year if everybody else around us is?
Well, remember, we're
Doing
the
it?
only ones that
Require a
has to
vote.
be voted upon.
But I mean, you could
Most
have a
places,
vote
there's
every-
just, 3 or 4% annual increase, whereas we wait 8 years or 10 years and 30%. And it's just,
hard
you know.
to-
Because it's really challenging
It's hard
put
to
it
ask.
to get it
ballot.
and to get it voted upon.
And we've had stormwater and Norman Forward and
Wastewater.
transportation bonds and public transit sales tax. We've just had all these other things that we put forward, and in my experience, it is challenging to ask voters to increase their monthly bill on something.
But
And so we've, not just this council,
Yeah.
prior council, prior before I've been on council, tends to just wait until there's no choice, like they can't avoid it any further. It's politically difficult. There's just not a lot of, let's go ask the people for more money.
Yeah, but it's a challenge we got to take on, and we
Yeah.
got to do it, and we got to get it through. And if, in my opinion, 2-3% raises over 2% here, 3% here, wait a year, 3% again. Can you tag those together to be on
Yes, you could put
one?
it on the ballot that way.
Okay.
It's just that we have to have voter approval, but the voters could approve 3% a year for 10 years. That's something you could.
That
put
one's a
on the
little
ballot.
much. But for 2 years, yeah.
And it was 9 years.
You said
The
2, I
last-
said 10, I'm sorry.
The last rate increase before the last one was 9 years before, in 2006. So 2006, 2015. And so
Well,
that's a long, two water rate increases since 1999 in the
That's
city of
crazy.
Norman.
and if
So, I
you
mean, that's
look
like,
at the,
that's extreme restraint, I think, fiscally,
is.
on our part.
and if you look at the budget book where the water and the enterprise fund is for the water, and you look at the next year projections, it's dismal.
Yeah,
And so we're starting to get into bracketed money. It's not good money.
I think we just have to really kind of hit that home. 2 increases in this century in Norman. So that's, it's tough, but we don't ask very often. I think we really have to try to make that a key piece. That I know it sucks,
Yeah.
but we don't ask very often. We don't ask until it's really needed.
Any further thoughts or discussion? All right. Thank you all. Next, item 2, discussion regarding funding to address departmental staffing levels.
Earlier this afternoon, we sent out some information by email. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it yet, but if not, I have it on paper here. Several council members and along with the city manager making visits to some of comparable cities, college towns, if you will, in the SEC Southeastern Conference that we will be joining here in the next few years. And so there were comparisons being made about those governments to Norman, and population size, all of those sorts of things. Now, as you see there on the title page, we have been doing this sort of benchmarking work for many, many years, and that information is in your budget document every year. It's on page 6 and 7, but we have been comparing to Oklahoma cities and cities in neighboring states of population size and university towns and that sort of thing. SEC towns are in more distant states, if you will, but we did do some preliminary work comparing Norman to some cities in the SEC, and the findings are remarkably similar to the findings that we have had in comparing to Big 12 cities, if you will. That Norman is a very small operation. The first thing that you see here, and we basically chose the SEC cities that were most comparable to Norman in population. There's a lot of SEC cities that are quite a bit smaller than Norman, Starkville, Mississippi, for example, and a lot of cities that are quite a bit bigger. Baton Rouge, Louisiana is a capital city, that sort of thing. But these five are pretty close to in size to Norman. Some other similar characteristics, and obviously that they are college towns. But on the second comparison that you see there is the land area comparison, that again, Norman is vastly larger than all of the cities, both in the Big 12 region and in the SEC region that we would compare to. So while we have done all these comparisons, per capita expenditures, per capita revenues, if you did revenues per land area, it would just, we'd be way out of, and just understand that for that huge land area, we have to provide street maintenance services. We have to provide fire response. We have to provide, and so just understand that that is a valid comparison, and Norman's governmental operation is that much relatively small compared to these other cities. The next one then compares employees per capita. And again, Norman is much smaller than these comparable cities. The largest of them, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, has 12.8 employees per 1,000 citizens. Norman has 7.1. Columbia, Missouri, which is one of the cities that we have been doing comparisons to, has 12.2 employees per 1,000 citizens. Gainesville is at 11.2. Auburn, Alabama, and College Station, Texas are both ahead of us at 8.1. So again, and this is not looking at any individual area of the operation, but just understand that across the board, Norman is understaffed. And you can talk about any individual area, but just as a whole, we're a small operation. The next page compares our general fund to those cities. And you see that we have, and this is actually, if you recall, this is an up year for our general fund, because we had a pretty good sales tax, at least last year, that is carried forward. So this is an up year for us, but we are by far the smallest of these comparable cities as the overall size of our general fund.
Yeah, I noticed, and I will get to it in a couple slides, but I noticed all these other cities had more than just sales tax revenue.
Yeah,
as
that's
their-
what we'll talk about here. So the next pie chart shows you the familiar pie chart that you've seen in the budget document of our general fund revenues by source. 65% of our general fund revenues coming from sales and use tax. And then again, look at the comparable pie to these SEC cities. And again, it's not different from the Big 12 cities outside of Oklahoma. But notice that our 65% sales and use tax dependence in the general fund compares to 26% in the neighboring state of Columbia, Missouri. Also in Columbia, Missouri, notice that intergovernmental revenue from other governments, state shared revenues, if you will, is 13.6%. Our other tax revenue, which is the category that we have that's comparable, is 3.3%. In most other states, there's a lot more money being shared from the state government to the local government than there is in Oklahoma.
What is
The payments in lieu
yeah,
of taxes that you see there is comparable to our utility transfers that you see. You'll recall that our utilities, as a payment in lieu of taxes, payment in lieu of what they would pay, a private utility would pay to operate in the public right-of-way and to pay in property taxes. Our utilities pay 5%. In Columbia, Missouri, they pay 16%. So again, our general fund operation is operating with its hands tied behind its back. And there are some things that we should take pride in that. But just understand that it's not a level playing field. College Station, Texas, pretty similar in population, but it's in a different state, which means that they're at the 10 o'clock section of the pie. 33.9% of their general fund revenue is coming from property tax. Ours is 0. Their utility transfers is 14.3 million, 14.3%. Ours is 5. I don't want to hear your lip anymore, Chris.
But you'll notice he waited till the auditors were gone
Yeah.
before he said it out loud.
Auburn, Alabama. Interesting, I found this pie to be, their sales and use tax is 46%. Now remember, that compares to 65% here in Norman and most cities in Oklahoma. But this was a larger slice than in most outside of Oklahoma cities than I have seen. But notice that they're getting a large contribution from occupational licenses and business licenses. That we have a very small portion of our revenue coming from those sources. And again, they're getting 7% from property tax. We get 0. Gainesville, Florida, and again, this was very preliminary work that our staff did, just looking at the budget documents from these cities. But a quick calculation will show you that 30% of their general fund revenue is coming from property tax. Ours is 0. Tuscaloosa, Alabama, I didn't really like how they presented their information. We would have to do some more work for comparisons there because you see they have just taxes. They didn't break it out for sales tax or property tax or whatever. So we'll do some more work than that. Where we have done our benchmarking work over the years, Kim and Jacob and we have, and also in the HR department, we have contact people in those comparable cities that we can call upon. And if the day comes that we actually go to the SEC and we'll expand these benchmarks, we'll try to establish those contacts in some of these SEC cities as well. But again, I thought this was very, very interesting information. It certainly confirmed everything that we have been talking about for years.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just looking at, all of these graphs, and I had visited Tuscaloosa with the city manager and some others. And I think that this conversation about us being solely pretty much reliant on sales tax was really fascinating to them. And they're like, oh, wait, we kept having to clarify, like, oh, here's a caveat to this, and then also the caveat that, our rate increases have to go to a vote of the people, and how unique that is within that microcosm of the state of Oklahoma. At what level do we think that it is appropriate to push OML a little bit harder on our state legislature? Now, I understand this is a very big change, but to lobby that this would look different. And I don't know
OML has been trying to fight this battle for generations. It's not OML that's the holdup.
Well, no, I
they
know.
are our lobbying body. But it's a constitutional provision. It would take a change to the state constitution. And I have not heard that battle being really on the front burner for a long time. I found the response that you got. Just know that I have gotten that same response when I go to national conferences for
They're
30
like,
plus years, and they're like, "What?"
That's crazy.
And from the makeup of our legislature being predominantly rural, who would benefit most? The
Yeah.
rural communities who, a Dollar General could be the largest sales tax generator, or a gas station, the largest sales tax generator in some of these rural communities. You would think those legislators would say, maybe there's something to this. Councilmember Holman heard like almost the opposite end of the spectrum from counterparts in Lexington about their primary revenue source. And I thought, I won't complain too loudly in front of Lexington, their primary revenue source being an occupation tax.
No sales tax.
And that occupation, it's a payroll tax that the council, which is a 15-member board because they incorporated the city and the county as one body in 1974, they can raise that tax rate by a vote of the 15. But every time it goes up, businesses leave.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly volatile. And they're struggling. They recognize they're going to have to do something dramatically different to survive going forward. You know, a lot more staffing than we have, you know, just in a per capita or a per square mile. They're much, you know, fatter than we are. We are way leaner than they are in all those respects. And they're starting to recognize their particular formula is not a formula for sustainability either.
Yeah, okay, so, you know, that's a dead end, I guess, with the legislature and changing that, but what are our other opportunities to diversify?
Well, okay, so that, the last word that you put in there changed my response.
Well, say what you were gonna say, don't listen, I want, what are our opportunities for?
Our opportunities the most realistic things we can do is better enforce the laws that are on the books for collection of sales tax and use tax. And we've been talking about this for a long time as well. The judicial relief we got with the Wayfair case some years ago, but there should be a similar uptick in our use tax collections if we got legislative relief from Congress in the Marketplace Fairness Act or the Remote Transactions Parity Act. If we could get either one of those legislations to pass, because, you know, we're talking about interstate commerce here, so it's federal legislation that we need. But the Wayfair case has a big loophole in there, that if a vendor sells less than $100,000 of merchandise in a given state, then they don't have to collect and remit use tax. Well, there's a whole lot of vendors that are selling things to folks in Norman that collectively don't sell $100,000 worth of merchandise in Oklahoma. And it would not be that hard for them when they're filling out that they're delivering to area code 73072. We know what the sales tax rate is and just collect that sales tax and pay it. I mean, you know, but by law, they don't have to, so they don't. And that's unfair to our local businesses who are collecting and remitting sales tax. That's the thing that we have been trying to, and that is realistic.
And a great focus for an internal auditor to say, we're very interested in tracking
Yeah.
whatever the law allows. We need to make sure we're collecting all of that. And then how do we hustle that legislation?
What was the second piece of federal legislation?
Okay, I believe I could have the Senate and the House of Representatives reversed, but I believe on the Senate side, it's called the Remote Transactions Parity Act. And on the House of Representatives side, it's called the Marketplace Fairness Act.
Okay, thank you. Just thinking about the fly-in.
And
Next
just
time.
remember that in every instance where this has been voted on in Congress, the Oklahoma legislation has voted against it.
Why?
You know, it's the Republican-Democrat thing, and the Republicans, you know, it's a tax, and so they're opposed to it.
I understand that.
But again, it's not a new tax. It's enforcement of an existing tax.
We also have some of the lowest gas tax in the country.
Yeah.
I reminded folks that I ran my entire street maintenance operation in Kansas on gas tax. We have none here. So that comes from the general fund as well.
Yes, ma'am.
I was kind of wondering about the licensing fees for Auburn, the occupation one.
Yeah,
and
that's kind of what
building.
Darrell was talking about. They're, by a different name, that occupational license tax they're calling it a license, but it's really a tax. And we had the same thing when I was working for the city of Seattle. Every business has to pay an occupational license fee that really operates as an income tax.
We don't have that
The
though.
occupational license tax is for liquor. It's not like occupational permit tax is for liquor licenses. because we're not allowed to call it a license under statute, so it's called a tax.
But yeah, not a general fund revenue source like that.
No, but, and then building permits were another that caught my eye, and I'm kind of curious, like, thinking about entering the SEC and all kinds of building projects that will come our way. Always, actually. Do we get money on
Yes,
building
we get
permits?
building
Where
permit
is that
revenue.
in this breakdown of ours?
It's in licenses and permits,
So licenses and fees on this graph, 3.2%?
yes.
The thing that'll be interesting, and I'm glad we will have an extra set of eyes in-house when that merger to the SEC happens, when we were asked by the Tuscaloosa people, how much money do you calculate comes into the local economy from a Big 12 home game? And Dan Shin's number is approximately 11.2 million. And we said, what's your number? And they said 33 million.
For
Yeah,
for,
for Tuscaloosa. And
Okay.
smaller city, smaller population, smaller, square miles. But if that trend happens and the amount of economic activity triples from a home game, we're going to have to live in it to see how it translates into sales tax and hotel bed tax and all those other revenues to see, what that means in terms of our ability to staff up and provide the expected level of service.
for our building permits, how much do those cost? And is it based on the project?
It depends on the size of the project and the nature of the project.
Yeah.
Jane can certainly speak to that better than I can.
It goes by square footage. I will say, sometimes you'll hear that they had a building permit that was $12,000 or something like that. That's going to the excise taxes because we're only like $1. I forget exactly what it is, but it's $1 something a square foot.
And remember, that part of that fee does not go to the general fund. That goes to the excise tax fund in the wastewater utility.
Gotcha, man.
I think it would be helpful to know how we compare to those SEC cities in our fees, connection fees, permits, maybe even also what does it cost basically too? What are we having to spend? I do think the location and size of Norman is notable because, as you pointed out, there's really no other cities that land area even come close to us in this population. There's not really many cities nationwide that have this much land area and the same population that we do. Most all of them are much larger than Norman in population. And that is definitely a major factor with all the infrastructure services that we provide. I think our proximity to another large city is another factor. So like Tuscaloosa isn't particularly close to Birmingham, and Birmingham's not as large of a city as Oklahoma City, obviously, either. Fayetteville's not really that close to Tulsa. Columbia's exactly in between St. Louis and Kansas City, so it's on its own. Athens, Georgia's on its own. Kind of a bit of a ways from Atlanta. And outside of those, the SEC schools are in big cities, much bigger than Norman, like Knoxville or Austin and Nashville. And so it is hard to find a real comparison to our situation in the SEC or anywhere nationwide when it comes to those issues. And I did find the situation in Lexington to be pretty interesting with the occupational tax and not having sales tax really, and it was a state legislature issue, and there wasn't a lot of will to change that situation there. And they expressed concerns that the city of Lexington could be insolvent if they didn't make drastic changes based on their lack of revenue source. And they were bound geographically by the horse industry, which is a major industry for them, but they said they can't expand anything has resulted, they had a really nice downtown. It was very dense, and the campus was dense, and it was pretty neat in that way, but, and then it was just completely surrounded by green space. So they probably have a pretty good stormwater system going on there. Based on,
They get more rain than we do.
and there was not concrete surrounding the whole city to run off. So, but it was fascinating to compare it to how we do it. But again, Lexington is quite a bit larger than Norman, at 300,000 plus, and being a consolidated city county and having a strong mayor form of government too. And so definitely a lot hard to find a real comparison to our situation. In my experience, I would like to see the same, maybe add to this chart, Athens and Fayetteville, since they are pretty similar size to Norman. Fayetteville being pretty close to us as well, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, we'll eventually build that out with all of the SEC communities and be increasing our outreach and communication with everybody's counterparts in those cities. And it'll definitely have budget impacts on us going forward. But what we do see is there are opportunities for the private sector to take full advantage of crowds that we don't currently see that should translate directly into sales tax and hotel bed tax, just based on volume of visitors. When you see a school, and I think, in the Big 12, Kansas is the basketball school, Baylor, up there too. Kentucky, I thought we had them whipped when it comes to a football experience.
Oh, yeah.
But their basketball experience transformed their whole downtown.
Yeah.
There were 22,000 people at a basketball game, and we had about 1,200 the same night. So they get
And
more
remember,
energy
see,
year round.
there's 20 or 25 home basketball days. There's only 6 home football days.
So
Yeah.
big opportunities for us to improve our visitors' participation that way.
Well, I would mention too that, yeah, with our proximity to Oklahoma City, people have options to stay at hotels and more in Oklahoma City and eat at restaurants and more in Oklahoma City, or go to Noble and eat at Kendall's. And if they're going to an Alabama football game, you're gonna stay in
stuck.
Tuscaloosa.
Yep.
You're gonna have to drive an hour and a half or whatever to get in. So you're shopping and spending all your money in Fayetteville if you're going to an Arkansas game. And
We can put a fence
so
up.
a lot of advantages of being close to a bigger city like we are, I think, but some disadvantages too compared to cities that are kind of their own.
I think once we recognize we are, at hotel capacity this frequently and at restaurant capacity this frequently, it will absolutely stimulate the investment from the entrepreneurial community in the metro and beyond to increase our capacities. And our goal is to capture as much of that visitor cash as possible inside city limits. So it may become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I just anticipate some growing pains while we play catch up.
I think the number was 1,000 beds that Dan Shem is coming up with, but it doesn't say what quality of bed that is, whether that's a 4-star or a 2-star kind of a bed. And so, yeah, the money's gonna come where they can make money. I'm sorry, I
No.
jumped in.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make one comment about something that Councilmember Holman was talking about in terms of, connection fees. I had a fairly informal conversation with one of the gentlemen that we were kind of touring Tuscaloosa with, and they had an explosion of development around their stadium and in their downtown area. And so I was just curious, so I asked him what their connection fees were, and he jabbed the president of their chamber and said, she just asked about this, and he's like, it's 0. And not that as a good thing. He was very concerned and said all of this development that has been created with 0 connection fees has created an extreme condition with their water and wastewater ability for capacity.
Councilmember Schuler got kudos for actually recognizing the need for such a thing, because apparently that wasn't a popular concept.
Yeah, and so I just think, you're looking at Tuscaloosa with the highest general fund balance, you're looking at with the most people, and it's not that they don't have challenges as well, and thinking about the way that their mix of the fees and what they're asking of, the development community, and being able to expand on their utilities and what,
It would be interesting to see, and we didn't do any rate comparisons, but we will. But I'd be interested to see what their utility rates are.
Right.
I bet they're way higher than ours.
yeah, so I just thought it was a really interesting conversation that came out of just that one simple question.
Yep.
And that they did not see it. They're like, we've lost all of that potential revenue because it's been set at zero, and that was not popular, but recognizing the failure in that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that information would be helpful for sure, to know, like, we have the comparison of our total utility costs and compared to all the other cities and how our total is the lowest or second lowest. And so, they may not have connection fees, but they're apparently collecting a lot on something else, right? Or like Texas doesn't have an income tax, but they have the third highest property taxes in the nation, so it's
Pay me now, pay me later.
yeah, so it'd be interesting to compare what our overall cost of.
So this original assignment came from Councilmember Schuler's, questions. Her questions in Tuscaloosa were particular to building maintenance and facility maintenance and comparing theirs to ours and that sort of thing. But just reminding council that we have had this discussion. We had this discussion when we were talking about the budget in April and May. And we were talking about, that we had this good sales tax year. What if the bubble bursts and, we go down 10%? But what if we stay where we are? Or what if we, continue to grow a little bit, 2%? And we were saying that, if we continue to grow, we will be in a position to address some of these short staffing situations. And at the time, we talked about those areas that were, at that time at least, the council's highest priorities. To add the school resource officers, even if the school district did not increase their contribution. To fund those stormwater areas that we know we are mandated to fund by our NPDES permit. To add Fire Station 10, we know the growth in the south central area of Norman, and we know that that is the next area. But just know that, this is the next handout, to address those areas is expensive. And remember that where we have been talking about the ARPA money that we've gotten as an example, as one-time money, these are ongoing expenditures. So these are the personnel requests that were actually made in preparation for the fiscal year 23 budget that we're in now. And you'll see that there were three things that the city manager actually recommended to be funded and that the council ultimately approved. So it was $700,000 for those 9 police officers. And again, those are ongoing expenditures. We added Tim might be able to tell me the actual title, but network engineer, and we added a part-time person at the Little Axe Community Center. That was it. But look at the things that were requested, and there is justification for all of these. The SROs, we know we need those. Fire Station 10 was not ranked that highly, but we know that that's something that we need. But notice that, that's $1 million a year. And it's $2 million a year to add all the firefighters that we know we were going to need in the future. We know we need those stormwater things that have been requested here, but we have not been in a position to fund them. So again, this is an ongoing budget discussion for council to have, and you may want to change some of those priorities from where they were back in April or May. But just know that the process is in place to try to address them if we have the funds to do it.
You're gonna keep me up tonight, aren't you?
That's my goal.
We see what you see.
Oh, no.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for this. I think one of the conversations that I had with Daryl in Tuscaloosa was, you know, thinking more long term and what would it look like if we could fully staff in the way that would make sense and kind of bring all of these different departments whole. And seeing this, I think is really interesting, kind of in aggregate.
Yep.
One of the questions that I had on here was the animal welfare technician. Was that not one of the positions that
No, we funded additional animal welfare people, I believe, two fiscal years ago. This is in a request in addition to that.
Yes,
And I see a lot of my colleague department here saying, well, wait a minute, this is just the things that got requested.
No, I
Remember, there's a
understand.
lot of other needs that they didn't even request.
But I remember there being a conversation recently where it was like HVAC and some different things. Was an additional person not a part of that?
Adoption coordinator and another technician, and I look over to our HR director, Dawn, and I think they're flying currently.
So would
Yes.
that be, I'm just saying there's an animal welfare technician here. Would that be a check because we did it, or is this?
This
is
was
in
a
addition-
request that was not funded.
Yeah, so it actually got funded after the fact. Yes, so you are correct.
So I'm just saying it is now funded.
Yeah, we would check that box off.
Because we've put in,
We did it after budget adoption. These
Yeah, it
all
was-
came in during budget
right.
development, but yes, that position is flying.
yeah, it was
as we
approved through
speak.
that process, but then with, I guess, outpouring of support from the community, that was something that we looked at, I thought.
And we made it happen. So, yeah, application is now being accepted for
Yeah.
that very position.
I just think that it's really interesting how, and I'm not unsurprised by how many are in Public Works, and specifically in the stormwater category. And it's one of the things that I've heard from, and I'm happy to see, you know, a street sweeper on here because that is something that we desperately need. So one of the, is this in a ranking order?
This
On the
is as
sheet.
they were ranked at the time the budget was being processed.
So what was the mechanism to rank?
So the process is all the department heads, we climb into the cage and we dogfight until
No.
the winner. Actually, each department head, and this is the beauty of the team approach in that we work closely enough together to recognize who is barely hanging on to the end of the rope. And usually those departments hanging on to the end of the rope, everybody says, that department needs it more than I do. And that's how we kind of come up with that list. And everybody gets to tell the story about where they're falling short. What we're seeing pressure on the other side of this is, right now our neighbors in Midwest City, they are down 50% of their line maintenance crew. They can't hire anybody. They've got half vacant positions. They're recruiting like crazy. They're not getting applicants. So it's almost we could fund many of these positions. Currently, Jane's got a long-range planner position being flown and we don't have a single applicant to consider. And it pays well. And we are a little nervous about what that may mean in our ability to keep up, even if money's not the issue.
Yeah.
Is the workforce available?
So that was going to be my question, is what happens when we fund positions and then they sit vacant for a number of years because we're unable to fulfill them?
Usually it wouldn't sit vacant for more than a year. The good news is the money just falls back down to fund balance and it's always available for council. Typically, if we are unsuccessful after a lengthy recruitment, we'll go back and retool a job description. And maybe what we'll do is we'll look for maybe one position down, a little less qualified, and figure maybe we'll get somebody green right out of school. We'll just have to train them up. We usually go and recruit for the need. And if we're unsuccessful, then we have to re-strategize to say we have workload and we just may need to approach it from a different direction. So usually wouldn't sit vacant for more than one budget cycle. We'd retool and go back out.
Is there a way to kind of assess the job market where some of those hires might be easier to grab than others?
We've been attempting to market in different ways. a lot more social media that we think we can cover, literally coast to coast, and hopefully appeal to folks based on the cost of utilities and, the cost of gas here is, for the same salary, your dollar go a lot farther in Norman than it may in, Las Vegas or New York or Los Angeles. So, we've expanded the net basically coast to coast, and we do see applicants coming in for those jobs where there are applicants from a much wider area than just typically the metro, which may have been the case 5 or 10 years ago. So when we're having those conversations, we may be talking about, okay, we may need to set the hook and reel this one in. We may need to talk about relocation assistance to get them to pack up from Colorado or, Wyoming and get them down here with us.
Do you think it would be hard to find somebody for Public Works, like a street sweeper or other things?
The Midwest City, and my guess is their salaries are competitive with ours. What we're seeing is jobs in the marketplace. Target talks about paying $25 an hour, and you get to wear a red polo shirt and khakis, and you don't have to shovel blacktop when it's 102 outside. That may be seen as a much easier way to make the exact same money. And we've had discussions about some of our mission critical positions we cannot do without, about we're going to have to crank the salary up, and 911 dispatcher. Somebody not answering the phone is not an option, and we're on mandatory overtime for our dispatchers. We got to crank the dial up, and we have to get more applicants. We think a new environment in an EOC will help, maybe help with the retention, but it's sure not helping on the recruitment side right now.
Also, because that job is so high stress,
In my opinion, the highest stress.
they're not like benefits that can come with that position. Like, we're offering the best access to mental health care for you.
We're actually
or-
pursuing an opportunity with the public safety pension boards to say, look, we think maybe we should consider our dispatchers as first responders. I mean, they're the ones that literally responding first, and maybe the opportunity to be in a pension system like a police or a fire pension might be that thing, because we get dispatchers in and they work for 6 months and realize, man, this is a lot of work and it's high stress.
Yeah.
That pension after 20 years may be the thing that helps them recognize it's worth sticking it out. So we're literally looking down several roads that we've never been down before to come up with the right package to attract and retain.
Councilman?
Yeah. So some of the positions, like, we don't have any room to add more dispatchers.
Correct.
right? Until the EOC is finished. And then the resource officers, we've been kind of trying to figure out what Norman Public Schools' priority is.
And we're currently deficit spending, well, I don't think last year we deficit spent in PSST just because sales tax went up so high. I think we covered all our
Right,
bills.
right.
The biggest change will occur when that debt service is paid off for the radio system and the major equipment. When that happens, you'll have ongoing positive cash flow available in PSST, where you will be able to meet some of those staffing demands that were outlined in the
When
Question.
Fire Station 5 is finished and paid for, then the priority list will be done.
absolutely.
Then it can start on others.
And then it goes into the general
Right.
fund.
Yep.
That's the way I've always kind of viewed the PSST, is that there'll always be, well, some folks were critical of it back when, because they thought, well, this will just be a slush fund for the city, is the exact words I heard from people. But I viewed it as, well, as soon as Fire Station 5 is finished and built, we're going to have to think about 10 and 11 and replacing 1 and 2 and doing things like that. There's always going to be public safety needs that cost a lot of money. So I didn't ever envision the PSST having just a flow of money to do whatever we want because
Yep.
of those needs.
It was always known, and that's why in the PSST ordinance, when the critical capital needs were done, it goes into the general fund, because we knew that the public safety sales tax at 0.5% was not going to cover the cost of all those additional personnel and related equipment. It never was thought so. The lines were always going to cross.
And I think, like on the school resource officers, it's somewhat difficult to say that the city should pick up the whole tab. I feel like if it's a priority for the public school system, it's something they would prioritize in their budget, right?
In
they would.
having that conversation with the folks in the school district, and what we're recognizing, we're planning a study session with council on that subject, where they're seeing their environment change. They recognize what their investment has been in the SRO program, and they feel like SROs are a very critical component of the overall deliverance of service on campus. What they are seeing, and I think highlighted by the pandemic, are behavioral health challenges in a younger and younger student population. And in a meeting that I was invited to participate in, hearing from the school counselors and the lady in charge of the children's State Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse for the younger population, they see a bigger demand. Their budget definitely didn't grow like our budget grew, through the pandemic. They lost student population, which means they lost funding. They believe they need to invest more in student advocates that are psychology trained for early intervention. And they're talking kindergarten, first, second grade, to address behavioral health challenges that these students are suffering and dealing with, that if they don't get addressed in an early intervention scenario, we wind up needing more SROs by the time these young people make it to high school. So we're working on a study session date, and when I heard that, I thought, okay, where those are positions we just don't have job descriptions like that. They never thought they'd have to invest in those positions down in the elementary schools. But when they talk about 6-year-olds with suicidal ideology, that's when I thought, that's not an SRO thing to deal with. That's definitely, school counselors and doing that student outreach, not related to the academic side at all. And I think the model will change over time in what, our priorities are from the city's perspective and what the district's priorities are in terms of dealing with those student challenges at early ages.
Well, I do. 2 of those 4 would be our responsibility in my view. So voter approved. So I think we have an obligation to fulfill them until voters at some point tell us otherwise. So, but that would be my thoughts about the PSST personnel. And then Fire Station 10, it's hard to get a little too ahead of, we haven't identified how we would fund building Fire Station 10 yet. So maybe with PSST, but that would have to wait till after 5 is finished. So that would be a decade, or it's 5, 7, 8 years away before we'd even start, unless we did through our public safety needs assessment. Maybe we find out what all we need and decide to do a bond thing in the future to fund it all or something. So I agree, we got to think about how we would staff it, but we haven't really identified how we'd even build it yet. So maybe that's not as a priority of a concern.
I think as we
but
work
definitely
our way,
needed in that part of town, I would say.
Yes. And of course, OTA will really have a better idea about where, the new 5 needs to be and how 10 will be impacted.
Well, and if new 5, will it need additional staffing than what it has now? I don't know.
Yep.
So, I would also mention that IT, I've mentioned it a lot before, how I consider it on the same level of public safety apparatus as our physical police and fire and EMS response, especially given the recent issue at the public school system, cities across the country being,
Target.
attacked and held for ransom and all sorts of stuff like that. It's just an issue I don't think it's only going to become more and more of a problem with each passing day. And so we've got to have, it seems like that department's got to be one that's got to be prioritized as being fully staffed as much as any.
Yeah, we're at risk as an organization, and our
Just the
customers
damage
are at
that could be
risk.
done to every department in the city and every citizen of Norman that has a utility bill or whatever, if that department isn't have what it needs. So that's one I think we really have to think about prioritizing in light of every department needing everything, but that one is, like I said, if something goes wrong there, that could affect every department in the whole city.
We do think by April, when the budget recommendation is starting to firm up, we'll know if that increase in the sales tax appears to be holding. And if so, we'll be more confident in bringing you recommendations on filling more of those requests than we did in the current fiscal year. Because one year could be an anomaly, a couple of years looks like it's becoming a trend.
And one other position I would just mention that I don't necessarily see it on here, but it was pointed out to me when I went on the overnight ride-along a few months ago, and then again over this weekend in a social media post about the police department being closed at nighttime, basically. There's nobody working in the lobby. So when I was on the ride-along, basically we went back there and there was nobody, so he was doing some of the stuff himself, and he was like pulling drawers, and he's like, well, I thought it was in that drawer, but it's not. And then I guess apparently over the weekend somebody's car was towed, and they went down to the police department, and there was nobody there, so
See
they
you
couldn't find out what
Monday.
it was. And so I saw that post on social media. I don't know if anybody else did, but
2 days in the impound yard versus a couple hours in the impound yard.
and so I've had a
adds up to
few
lot.
officers tell me that work nights that say not having someone, and I don't know if it's a funding issue or they can't find anybody that wants to work the desk all night, whatever. But that was an issue for the night shift, not having anybody working the counter.
Support besides just dispatchers.
Yes.
Thank you.
I thought there were records clerks there, but
Yeah, there always had been.
Yeah, it used to be. They're not,
They, I don't know what time it is at night, but there's nobody up front. I mean, used to when somebody was closer, before the dispatchers were all the way down there, you could like knock on the window and finally get somebody up there, or the lieutenant on night shift would be there or something like that, but it's not always.
And I guess the time that the officer I was with had to spend in there messing around in there, he was not obviously out on the
Inefficient
street
time.
Yeah.
doing stuff. So
And
they
he-
just had noted that was an issue that we
Yep.
might want to look into.
Definitely. Thank you.
that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Anthony?
That's all I have.
That's yours.
on this.
Well, thank you. Any more questions or anything? Okay. Perfect. Sort of. Item number 3, discussion regarding an ordinance empowering the city manager to set the price for the use of city-owned charging stations by other governmental agency entities in the general public. But,
Hi, hopefully this won't be terribly long. I know it's after 5. Short and sweet, the ordinance really isn't that long. I'm gonna go through first and talk a little bit about the background activities that led us to the ordinance. So in '95, ACOG put together the Clean Cities Coalition. Norman is a member of that. Its purpose was to improve regional air quality in the metro area. Part of that is through the reduction of petroleum use and transportation. And that's why we got a lot of grant stuff, which I'll talk about here in just a minute. In 2005, the council signed on to the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, and that also has pieces in it to reduce fossil fuel usage, especially in our transportation. We have the fuel conservation policy. This is pretty cool. In 2008, our fleet program manager, Mike White, put together this cool policy, and it has the measures for conservation. So it's the anti-idling, it's the carpooling, if you can, that kind of thing. It's the preventive maintenance. I don't know if you know this, but our fleet program, the preventive maintenance is just outstanding. It's amazing. It's down to a well-oiled machine. Then they came up the next year with the alternative fuel program. And so what that does is it encourages the use of the alternative fueled vehicles. Now we started originally with CNG, of course, because that was what was at the forefront to begin with. But they were Public Works had the great foresight is to see that they needed the flexibility because the other things were coming, right? EVs now. What about hydrogen? Did you guys see that? What? So they put in the flexibility to allow for those types of purchases as well. A really cool thing I learned about, thank you, Kim Kaufman, which I didn't know, which I should have known. Did you know we also have a sustainable purchasing policy where we're tasked with using the most sustainable or purchasing the most sustainable things? And that ties in to these other policies. It's amazing. In 2011, we went and did the CNG pricing ordinance. So we needed an ordinance, right, if we're going to allow CNG use by the public, a way to charge them, because we're not in the business of giving away our stuff. So it really just had the flexibility to allow the city manager essentially to set pricing just based on the volatility of the market. So up to daily, he has the ability. And then finally, in 2012, they actually put in the CNG fueling station with public use. And if you haven't been to it, go check it out. It's really cool.
It's $2.10 a gallon as today I saw. So
$2.10, yeah.
it's coming back from Macon.
It's amazing. And a lot of people, it's really cool because, Sean and Mike, they went ahead and put all this CNG here. But throughout the entire metro and in Oklahoma, and not just metro, the state, and in Oklahoma, you can now not go more than 100 miles and not find a CNG. So you will find a CNG station within 100 miles of wherever you're traveling. That's huge. And with the infrastructure money that's coming through, I imagine we're going to see that with electric vehicles too. In 2018, ECAB updated the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement and had new recommendations. You guys signed up with the Ready for 100 as well in 2018. 2019 was when the EV charging stations that we were involved with started coming in. We worked with Francis Solar. They were the ones that went to DEQ and got the grant, but we kind of were their partner. They needed a municipal partner to do this program. And then this year, guys, already, right? We have the electrical vehicle infrastructure at North Base and the transit facility. It's there. It's amazing. The electric buses are on their way. They're on their way. All right. So I mentioned grants. We did. We got a lot of grant money for this, and more's coming down the pipe, so who knows where it could lead eventually. But to begin with, you remember, I'm sure, that Volkswagen, they falsified some data when they were doing emissions, right? And they got in trouble. And the money was sent out to the states. Well, Norman got $494,000 of that money. $450 went to the city, and that was to do 50-50 with the buses, with one electric bus. And the other, the $44,000, that was the Francis Solar that I was talking about. Now, they were originally only funded to bring 2 stations, but in fact, they brought 3. So that was pretty cool. We got an extra one that we weren't expecting. We also got an FTA, the Transportation Authority, the Federal Transportation Authority, gave us a grant for another electric bus and more infrastructure, so we can charge them. I mean, what good is it if you have the item if you can't charge it or use it, right? So we need both. And then ACOG saw that too, and I'm really, really excited about ACOG because they've really found us to be a great partner and tend to fund our projects. Yay! So we got for both North Base and for municipal city complex. So those will be coming in the future. And in fact, I'll talk about in just a few minutes where we are in those projects. So let's talk about the actual ordinance. It's pretty short and sweet. It's 2 sections, and they add those 2 sections to Chapter 2. That's also where the CNG pricing ordinance is located. One of the sections, it allows for designation of those reserved spaces. It says what you can do in those spaces, which, charge your car. That's what it is. And then it describes, like, we have definitions. What is an electric vehicle? What do you mean by hybrid? What is battery electric, etc. And then the other piece talks about the fact that our city manager can set pricing for that, because we don't want to give away our power. We'd like to get some money. If we're going to do it, then we should get paid for it.
And kind of that thought is the electric bill most likely get paid, well, we probably pay it out of a couple of different funds, but we would account for the revenue in the same fund for which we paid the electric bill on the charging stations. The ability to get as close to break even as possible, it might not be seen as a good idea if our taxpayers are subsidizing electric vehicle owners. We're not subsidizing any other
CNG
vehicle
or
owner. So,
gasoline.
break even would always be the goal.
Or make a profit?
Council's call, happy to.
Councilmember Grant?
So do you have any comparisons in other cities, what that pricing goes
Why,
for?
yes.
Yes, in that opportunity, and the way those systems kind of work is typically you buy the electric car, you wind up with a key fob, it gets connected to your debit card or your credit card or whatever funding source you want. And we're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. We might be talking thousands of dollars citywide. It still winds up being just a little tiny slice.
How do you charge though? Pardon the pun.
Yeah, our pump, when you plug it into your car and bump your key fob up against it, the billing, our charging station goes out and grabs the appropriate fee from whatever card you
Put a credit
attach
card or
to
a
it.
debit card in.
So what does that compare to like a tank of gas?
It is, oh, please, yeah, Michelle's been living in this.
So you can fill up an electric vehicle. Let's talk about like a Chevy Volt or a Nissan Leaf. $4 to $5. $4 to $5
For 300 miles in range.
Yeah, exactly. 250, 300. Now, if you're looking at a higher end Tesla, it can go a little more just because they suck a lot more power and those particular machines tend to charge more. But yeah, it's $4 to $5 to maybe $10 to.
Bargain.
So just for clarification on allowing the city manager to set the pricing, the city manager already has the ability to do that for CNG.
Correct.
And so we would just be adding language for the EV
Correct.
charging stations.
So the
Okay.
two sections specifically, so for the CNG pricing, it's just natural gas pricing.
Yeah.
This one would just be electric vehicle, but you're right. The first section is how he can charge, and the second piece is the narrative.
So basically, we've already done this once, and so now we're just adding.
We're mimicking.
EV. Yeah. Okay.
And to allow for that volatility, because, the
Perfect.
markets for energy is.
Well, I would imagine too that if it required an active council, that would take too long. Like we want to be able to set them
You're right.
very quickly. Yeah.
Exactly, because if it turns, if you're exactly right, because what if it's 2 cents today, but tomorrow it bumps up to 10, but
Right.
now we have to go to,
Yeah.
exactly.
And every 2 weeks is when we vote, and so that's not quick enough.
Yeah, at the
Right.
gas pump, you see it went up, it went down, and it changes weekly, and
Yeah.
hopefully these won't have to change that frequently, but it's possible.
Sure. Okay.
Well, we got
Yeah.
IT guys, they can get it.
They're pretty good about that.
Very good.
Perfect.
So this is the location of the charging stations that we're involved with. So that's the Francis Solar and the ones that we're putting in that we're in control of. I did put it on a map. The first three are the Francis Solar. You can see we have one down at Rudy's, which is by my office. So if you're ever down there, come say hi. I get lonely. Next up is Robinson Crossing. So it's over by the old movie theater, and it has 3 places for charging. And then of course at the city parking lot. The ones we have now, you can tell they're a little different in makeup. That's the one at the CNG facility, and this is the one for the bus. It will only be for the bus. And the other place where the second charging port will go will also be a long parking spot that's just for the bus. So this is the status of the various projects at the CNG station and at the transit facility. That's live. Boom, that's live. And those buses should be here by next month. So that's really
We're hoping
cool.
to be able to drive one up and park it in front of City Hall before the next council meeting, so we can all walk through it and spend a little time in it before we run in and do council business.
We get a ride
So
around the block.
exciting.
That'd be fun. Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, all right. Now I'm jealous.
And there's room for all of us. So.
All right. And then the project here at the municipal complex, it's in the bid design phase right now. We're almost done with that part. They'll start pre-work this winter and then finish the project by August.
Where will that be?
It'll be right in the front. All right, so I get turned around. I'm just going to look out this window.
That's the post office.
Thank you. It'll be right out the front. I did that. I got some furniture from legal today.
Don't turn around.
Yeah, I did. Well, I guess we're parked right there. It's right out front. It will be where the mound and the sign are at Gray Street. So it'll be pretty close to the post office. So if people are using our post office, they can charge. It'll be right next to where it says City of Norman Municipal, so that's where.
And
In fact,
it's
I
not
think
gonna be a heck of a
I have
revenue
a
source.
drawing.
There are 588 electric vehicles
Post
in
office
Norman,
patrons
according to
gonna park here
OG&E.
legally?
And they counted that up. There are, what, 220,000 regular vehicles. And so, in the county. And so, it's not a heck of a deal, but it may encourage people to be able to come downtown and do things. And I think the only trouble we're gonna have is how long do people park at that station after they have charged the vehicle, which is 3 hours?
It can be, actually, it really shouldn't be more than 2 hours.
Really?
But it can be up to 3 hours. What it says in the ordinance is they need to be charging their vehicle. So if they're there, they need to be plugged into the machine and charging their vehicle,
Is there
and
a
then parking enforcement.
Indicator light or something?
Yes. Yeah. I know, right.
Red light, parking enforcement's coming.
All right.
But that's
Yes, sir.
about all I have. If you want, I can show you a picture of where the spots are gonna be.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the only concern I would have about putting it out there is that all the come and go traffic from the post office, if people will be parking there as they run in real quick.
Oh, that never happens.
Hey, that's my parking spot.
Score! Now you need an EV.
I park in that last one a lot.
Yep. Well, that's excellent. All right. Any further discussion?
So that'll be ready for first reading, we think?
Park there.
The 22nd.
Perfect.
And do we have to make a decision as to how you charge on that? Do we have to make a decision
Nope.
if there's you're just gonna figure it out?
Yep.
Excellent. That's even easier. All right.
Mayor, we've been doing it for about 10 years on CNG. What we found is that about every quarter, we find a need to adjust that price. We try to find ourselves in the middle of the market, so we're looking around all of Oklahoma City Metro, and we try to be in about the middle. In the case of CNG, there have been 12, 15-month period where nothing changed. It was the same. We opened the station at 96 cents a gallon.
That's wild.
Well, I didn't expect it to be a spot thing, but yeah. Item number 4, discussion regarding the monthly revenue and expenditures reports.
I will pass and just respond to any questions that council members may have.
I had none. The one question that I have, or the one comment that I have, is I went over and visited Chris, and we're talking about water and stuff. I'd encourage you to look in your budget book at the projections for not revenue fund,
Fund balance.
imbalance funds for the ensuing years. And when we're building that argument, basically, to bring to the public about water rates and stuff, it is scary. We're okay now, but we're not. I think it was next year we really start into the negative numbers, and it is really scary because we need water and we need good water. So
The Reptilla study, Chris, we think will be done.
December 20th, we're gonna all meet, bring you something else, we can all discuss.
It should give us some great information for the next water rate question.
Just gonna mention, nice to see the bar chart get back up.
this was a good one.
8.8, that's pretty good.
Love rates.
And yeah, looking at going back to 2019, seeing that it's not just a high compared to last year's high of compared to lows, it is
It's actual in dollar terms, good.
a significant increase yeah.
Hopefully the new normal.
Yeah, just one question about that as well, because I know that we've been seeing, our other cities doing a little bit better on their projection from last year.
This most recent month, we were number.
We were the highest.
Yeah, no, I mean, I see that, but, October, September, August, July were a little bit down. But is it because we were
I
so
think it
much
was-
bigger last
I think
year.
it was because we were at the top of the
Every-
comparable cities
yeah.
for over a year straight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's just kind of normalizing itself.
Yeah, so it's really still positive, even though we've been seeing slight dips from previous
Just
ones. Yeah.
remind your folks to shop Norman.
Yes.
There you go.
Thank you.
Anything else for the good of the order? We're done.
Thank you.
And we start back up in a half an hour.
Yep. Head over to Whisper.